Most people move through their lives believing that thoughts are invisible, harmless, and fleeting, as if they exist only in the private space of the mind and disappear without consequence. But the truth is, every thought you think sets off a physical reaction in the body. The moment a thought appears, the brain responds as if something real is happening, releasing specific chemicals that travel through the bloodstream and communicate instructions to every cell. These chemicals are not neutral. They tell the body whether to prepare for danger, to relax, to repair, or to protect. Over time, the body begins to recognize these chemical signals as familiar, and what feels familiar starts to feel normal, even if it's harmful. When a person repeatedly thinks the same thoughts every day, the brain fires the same neural circuits over and over again. Neurons that fire together begin to wire together, and the brain becomes efficient at producing those thoughts automatically. The body then becomes conditioned to the emotions that follow those thoughts, whether it's stress, guilt, fear, resentment, or even self-doubt. Eventually, the body no longer waits for an external event to trigger those emotions. It begins producing them on its own, simply because it has learned that this is who you are. At that point, the body is no longer following the mind is following the body. This is where most people get stuck without realizing it. They try to think positively, to visualize change, or to make better decisions, but the body is still addicted to the chemistry of the past. If the body has been living in stress for years, calm can feel unfamiliar and unsafe. If the body has been conditioned to struggle, peace can feel boring or even threatening. So the moment a person tries to change their thinking, the body sends signals back to the brain that say, "This doesn't feel right. Go back to what you know." That's not a lack of willpower. That's biology enforcing habit. Every emotion you feel is a direct reflection of a chemical state in the body. Emotions like fear or anger are not abstract experiences. They are measurable chemical storms. When those storms happen repeatedly, the body builds receptors to become better at feeling them. This means that the body literally reshapes itself to match the emotional life you've been living. Over time, the body becomes the unconscious mind running programs that were once conscious choices. You might say you want to change, but if your body is still chemically anchored to the old identity, it will quietly pull you back into familiar patterns of thinking and behavior. This is why insight alone doesn't transform a life. You can understand something intellectually and still live the same way, because understanding does not automatically change the chemistry of the body. Real change begins when a person becomes aware of the thoughts they think most often and the emotions they live by most consistently. That awareness creates a pause, and in that pause, choice becomes possible. When you interrupt an automatic thought and choose a different response, even briefly, you are sending a new signal to the body. That new signal tells the cells that something different is happening, and the body begins to listen. As this process repeats, the brain starts forming new neural pathways, and the body starts experiencing new chemical states. What once felt uncomfortable slowly becomes familiar. Peace starts to feel natural. Confidence begins to feel embodied instead of imagined. The body learns that it doesn't need to stay in constant protection mode. With repetition, the body accepts this new internal environment as the new normal. This is not about forcing positive thoughts. It's about training the body to live in a different chemical reality. The most important realization in all of this is that you are not at the mercy of your genes, your past, or your circumstances. You are constantly instructing your body with the thoughts you think and the emotions you rehearse. When you become conscious of that process, you step out of being a victim of your biology and into being a participant in it. Your thoughts stop being background noise and start becoming deliberate signals. In that moment, the mind is no longer something that just reacts to life. It becomes the architect shaping the body from the inside out. Most people believe their emotions are reactions to life, caused by circumstances, people, or events outside of them. But emotions are not just responses. They are signals that train the nervous system what to expect next. When the same emotional state is experienced repeatedly, the body begins to anticipate that state before anything even happens. The nervous system becomes predictive instead of responsive. It no longer waits for the future to arrive. It prepares for a future that looks exactly like the past. This is how the body learns time. It learns it through repetition. When someone lives in stress day after day, the nervous system adapts to that stress as if it is normal. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, tightened muscles, and heightened alertness become the baseline. The body starts to believe that danger is always just around the corner. Even in moments of calm, the nervous system stays on edge, scanning for problems that may not exist. This is not because something is wrong with the person, but because the body has been trained to survive in a specific emotional environment. Over time, that environment becomes the only one the body recognizes as safe. Every emotion you feel leaves a neurological imprint. The brain records the internal state you were in and links it to your sense of identity. If frustration is felt often enough, the nervous system learns how to return to it quickly and efficiently. If sadness is lived daily, the body memorizes the posture, the breathing pattern, and the internal chemistry required to recreate it. Eventually, these emotional states no longer require a trigger. The body generates them automatically, and the mind follows with thoughts that justify the feeling. The future is no longer unknown, it is rehearsed internally long before it arrives. This is how people unknowingly live the same day over and over again while time appears to move forward. The same emotional reactions create the same decisions, which lead to the same behaviors and the same outcomes. Even when opportunities for change appear, the nervous system resists them because they represent the unfamiliar. The body prefers predictable discomfort over unpredictable peace. What feels known feels safe, even if it's painful. So the nervous system subtly steers the person back toward situations, relationships, and thoughts that match the emotional patterns it knows how to regulate. The most powerful part of this process is that the body does not distinguish between real experiences and imagined ones. When you repeatedly relive past events emotionally, the nervous system reacts as if those events are happening again in the present moment. The same stress hormones are released, the same survival circuits are activated. The body stays locked in the past while the mind believes it is preparing for the future. In reality, it is only reinforcing the same internal state again and again. The nervous system becomes conditioned to expect disappointment, rejection, or struggle before anything has occurred. Over time, this conditioning becomes identity. A person no longer says, "I feel anxious," but unconsciously becomes someone who is anxious. The emotion turns into a personality trait. The nervous system doesn't just experience the emotion, it organizes the entire body around it. Digestion, immune response, sleep patterns, and hormonal balance all begin to reflect the emotional environment that has been practiced most often. The future the person expects is not based on possibility, but on familiarity. The body becomes a map of the past. Change becomes difficult not because the person lacks desire, but because the nervous system is loyal to what it has learned. When someone tries to imagine a different future, one that feels lighter or more expansive, the body reacts with discomfort. That discomfort is interpreted as a warning, even though it is simply the nervous system encountering the unknown. The body sends signals of unease to pull attention back to old emotional states. This is why people abandon change right before it begins to take root. The nervous system is defending the emotional reality it has rehearsed. The turning point begins with awareness. When a person notices the emotional state they live in most of the time, they begin to see the pattern. They recognize that the emotion is not happening to them, but through them. That awareness interrupts the automatic loop between emotion and expectation. The moment someone observes their emotional response without immediately acting on it, the nervous system receives a new message. It learns that the familiar reaction is not the only option available. With repeated moments of conscious interruption, the nervous system slowly starts to reorganize. New emotional states are introduced gently, not through force, but through consistency. As the body spends more time in calm clarity or presence, it begins to associate those states with safety. The nervous system updates its prediction of the future. Instead of bracing for what usually goes wrong, it becomes open to what has never happened before. The emotional rehearsal changes, and with it, the internal expectation of life begins to shift, allowing the body to loosen its grip on the past and soften its need to control what comes next. The body is not just a structure made of bones, muscles, and organs. It is a living record of everything you have experienced. Every intense moment, every unresolved emotion, every repeated reaction leaves an imprint. When something happens that carries emotional weight, the body responds instantly, tightening certain muscles, altering breathing, shifting posture, and releasing specific chemicals. If the experience passes and the emotion is processed, the body returns to balance. But when the emotion is suppressed, ignored, or repeatedly revisited, the body holds on to it. Over time, what was once a moment becomes a pattern, and what was once a reaction becomes a habit. This is how the body learns the past without words. It doesn't remember through stories or timelines, it remembers through sensation. A certain tone of voice can tighten the chest. A familiar situation can create tension in the stomach before the mind even understands why. The body responds first because it has been trained to protect based on previous experience. Long after the event is over, the body behaves as if it is still happening. This is not weakness or imagination. It is the intelligence of survival repeating what once worked. As these reactions repeat, the body begins to automate them. Muscles contract in the same way, breathing becomes shallow in the same moments, and the nervous system activates the same stress response without conscious choice. What started as a response to an external event becomes an internal reflex. The body no longer waits for danger, it assumes it. In doing so, it creates a constant background of tension that feels normal simply because it is familiar. Many people live their entire lives inside these patterns without realizing that their body is replaying old information. The mind often believes it has moved on because it can recall the past without emotion, but the body tells a different story. The body does not respond to logic, it responds to energy and sensation. You can intellectually forgive, understand, and explain, yet still carry the physical memory of an experience. That memory lives in posture, in movement, in breath, and in the subtle way the nervous system stays alert. Until the body is shown that the experience is truly over, it continues to act as if it must stay prepared. This is why habits are so difficult to break. Habits are not just behaviors, they are embodied memories. The body has learned a sequence of internal states that lead to certain actions. Stress leads to distraction. Tension leads to control. Emotional discomfort leads to familiar coping mechanisms. The mind may decide to change, but the body resists because change feels like uncertainty. The body equates the familiar with safety, even when that familiarity is rooted in pain. So it pulls the person back into known patterns through sensation and impulse. Interruption is the key to transformation, but interruption must happen at the level of awareness. The moment you notice a familiar reaction arising in the body, you create a space between stimulus and response. That space is powerful because it breaks the automatic loop. Instead of unconsciously repeating the past, you witness it. The body may still tighten, the emotion may still arise, but awareness changes the outcome. The nervous system receives new information. This pattern is being observed, not obeyed. When awareness is sustained, even for a few moments, the body begins to soften. Breath deepens. Muscles release. The chemical signals of stress start to decrease. This tells the body that it does not need to protect in the same way anymore. With repetition, the body learns that it can experience the sensation without immediately reacting. That learning is profound because it introduces choice where there was once compulsion. The body starts to update its memory. As new responses are practiced, the body begins to store different information. Calm becomes familiar. Presence becomes accessible. The nervous system learns new pathways that do not rely on old reactions. This doesn't happen through force or suppression, but through consistent conscious engagement. Each time a person chooses to remain present instead of reacting, the body records that moment as evidence of safety. Over time, those moments accumulate and begin to outweigh the past. The body's memory is not permanent, it is adaptive. It can be rewritten through experience. When the body experiences a new internal state repeatedly, it begins to reorganize around it. Muscles relax differently. Breathing changes. The baseline level of tension decreases. The body no longer expects the past to repeat itself because it is being shown something new in the present moment. What once felt automatic starts to feel optional. This is how transformation becomes embodied rather than imagined. Change is no longer something you think about, it is something you feel. The body stops pulling you backward because it has learned that the present moment is safe enough to inhabit. Old habits lose their grip not because they are fought against, but because they are no longer needed. The body, once a container for the past, becomes a platform for a different experience of self, responding to what is happening now instead of what once happened long ago. For a long time, people were taught that their genes were fixed, that their biology was a predetermined script handed down at birth. If illness ran in the family, it was expected. If certain limitations appeared, they were accepted as fate. But the body is far more responsive and intelligent than that outdated story suggests. Genes are not rigid blueprints, they are responsive switches. They listen. They receive information constantly from the environment, and one of the most powerful parts of that environment is the internal world of thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Every cell in the body exists in a sea of chemical information. That information comes from how you think, how you feel, and how you interpret your life. When your inner state is dominated by stress, fear, or constant vigilance, the body releases chemicals that signal survival. Those chemicals interact with cells and influence which genes are activated and which are suppressed. In this state, the body prioritizes protection over growth. Repair, regeneration, and balance take a back seat because the body believes it must stay alert to danger. This is not punishment, it is adaptation. When stress becomes chronic, the body begins to treat it as normal. Stress hormones flood the system regularly, and cells adapt to function under that chemical pressure. Over time, this adaptation can alter how genes express themselves. The body becomes more efficient at surviving short-term threats, but less efficient at long-term health. Inflammation increases, immune function weakens, and systems that require balance start to lose coherence. None of this happens overnight. It happens gradually through repeated internal states that signal the body how to behave. The remarkable part is that this process works both ways. Just as stress can influence gene expression in a limiting direction, elevated emotional states can signal the body toward growth and repair. When a person experiences sustained feelings of calm, gratitude, clarity, or purpose, the body releases a different set of chemicals. These signals tell cells that the environment is safe enough to invest energy in healing, regulation, and renewal. Genes associated with maintenance and balance become more active, not because of luck or genetics alone, but because of the internal information being provided consistently. This means that your inner state is not just a reflection of your life, it is a set of instructions shaping your biology. The body is constantly asking one question: is it safe to grow, or do I need to protect? That answer is delivered moment by moment through your emotional and mental state. When the answer stays the same for long periods of time, the body reorganizes itself to match that message. What you live emotionally becomes what you live biologically. Many people try to change their health only at the physical level, focusing exclusively on symptoms, treatments, or external interventions. While those can be helpful, they often overlook the internal signals that created the condition in the first place. If the inner environment remains unchanged, the body continues receiving the same instructions. True change requires coherence between mind and body, where thoughts, emotions, and behaviors align to signal a different internal reality. Changing that internal reality does not happen through force or denial. It begins with awareness. When you become conscious of how often your thoughts drift towards stress, worry, or anticipation of the worst, you start to see the pattern. Awareness alone creates a small but powerful shift. It interrupts the automatic signaling process. Instead of unconsciously instructing the body to stay in survival, you begin to offer it a new message, even if only for a few moments at a time. Those moments matter more than most people realize. A single experience of deep presence or emotional coherence introduces the body to a new chemical state. Repeated often enough, that state becomes familiar. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort signals safety. As safety increases, the body gradually reduces its defensive posture. Systems that were once suppressed begin to come back online. The body becomes more efficient, not because something external fixed it, but because it received consistent information that conditions had changed. This process requires patience, because the body does not change its programming overnight. It has learned through repetition, and it must unlearn through repetition as well. Each time you choose a new internal state despite old habits, you send a clear signal. Each time you regulate your emotions instead of reacting automatically, you reinforce that signal. Over time, those signals accumulate, and the body responds by adjusting gene expression to match the new internal environment. What this reveals is a deeper level of responsibility, not blame, but participation. You are not broken or limited by your biology. You are in constant communication with it. When you change how you think, how you feel, and how you perceive your life, you change the information your cells receive. The body responds not to hope or intention alone, but to consistent internal experience. When that experience changes, the body has no choice but to listen and adapt, reshaping itself according to the signals it is given moment by moment. Most people believe healing is something that happens to the body from the outside in. They wait for the right treatment, the right diagnosis, the right intervention, assuming that once the physical tissue changes, everything else will follow. But the body does not begin healing at the level of cells alone. It begins at the level of interpretation. How you perceive your life, your body, and your future shapes the signals that are constantly being sent into your nervous system. Those signals determine whether the body moves toward repair or remains locked in protection. Perception is not just how you see the world, it is how your brain assigns meaning to experience. Two people can face the same circumstance, yet their bodies respond in completely different ways. One person interprets challenge as threat, and the body responds with stress, tension, and resistance. Another interprets the same challenge as information or opportunity, and the body stays more regulated, adaptive, and open. The event is the same, but the internal meaning changes the biological response. This is where healing either becomes possible or remains blocked. When the brain perceives threat, whether real or imagined, it sends signals to the body to prepare for survival. Blood flow shifts, digestion slows, immune function is altered, and energy is redirected toward immediate protection. This response is useful in short bursts, but when perception stays locked in threat, the body never receives the signal that it is safe to repair. Healing requires resources, and the body will not invest those resources if it believes danger is present. The perception of danger keeps the body busy defending instead of rebuilding. Many people live in a constant state of internal vigilance without realizing it. They anticipate problems, rehearse worst-case scenarios, and identify with their symptoms. Over time, the brain learns to associate the body with vulnerability. Every sensation is interpreted as a warning. Every discomfort becomes evidence that something is wrong. This reinforces the perception of threat, and the cycle continues. The body listens to this interpretation and responds accordingly, staying in a guarded state that limits its ability to restore balance. The moment perception begins to change, the body begins to receive new information. When a person shifts from asking what's wrong with me to what is my body communicating, the relationship changes. Curiosity replaces fear, observation replaces judgment. This subtle shift alters the emotional tone of the experience, and that emotional tone changes the chemistry of the body. Stress hormones decrease, and regulatory systems begin to stabilize. The body responds not to words, but to the emotional meaning behind them. Healing accelerates when perception moves from separation to partnership. When the body is seen as an enemy or a problem, the nervous system stays on alert. But when the body is seen as intelligent and responsive, the nervous system softens. This doesn't mean denying symptoms or pretending everything is fine. It means recognizing that symptoms are signals, not punishments. That recognition alone reduces internal conflict, and reduced conflict creates coherence in the system. The brain is constantly updating the body based on what it believes is happening. If the brain believes the body is fragile, it will treat it as such. If it believes the body is capable and adaptive, it will allow more flexibility and resilience. This belief is not intellectual, it is emotional and embodied. You can say you believe in healing, but if your internal state is dominated by fear and doubt, the body receives fear and doubt as instructions. Healing requires congruence between thought, emotion, and perception. As perception shifts, behavior naturally follows. Breathing becomes deeper. Muscles release without effort. Sleep improves. These changes are not forced. They emerge because the body is no longer bracing against imagined danger. The nervous system begins to regulate itself more efficiently. Systems that were once overactive begin to calm down, and systems that were suppressed begin to re-engage. This is not because the body was fixed, but because it was finally given the conditions it needed to do what it is designed to do. Time plays a role in this process. The body has learned through repetition, and it changes through repetition. One moment of altered perception introduces the possibility of healing. Repeated moments create a pattern. Over time, that pattern becomes a new baseline. The body starts to expect safety instead of threat. Expectation matters because the body prepares for what it expects. When it expects safety, it allows processes like repair, regeneration, and balance to take priority. This is why true healing often feels like a shift in identity rather than a physical event. People describe feeling more like themselves, more present, more grounded. These experiences reflect a nervous system that is no longer stuck in defense. The body becomes more responsive and less reactive. Sensations are interpreted accurately instead of catastrophically. The internal environment becomes supportive rather than hostile. Perception does not change through force. It changes through experience. Each time you meet your body with awareness instead of fear, you offer it a new reference point. Each time you respond to discomfort with presence instead of panic, you weaken the old association between sensation and threat. Over time, the body learns that it can experience sensation without needing to protect against it. That learning changes how the brain maps the body, and that map influences how the body functions at every level. The most overlooked aspect of healing is that the body is always responding to what the mind believes is true in the present moment. When perception is rooted in the past, the body lives in the past. When perception opens to the present, the body follows. Healing does not begin when tissue changes. Tissue changes when perception shifts, when the internal story no longer tells the body to stay on guard, when the signal finally says it is safe enough to repair, safe enough to reorganize, safe enough to move forward, without needing to remain defined by what once happened. Breathing is one of the few functions in the body that operates both automatically and consciously, and that makes it a powerful bridge between the mind and the body. Most people breathe without awareness, allowing stress, emotion, and habit to dictate the rhythm. When the breath is shallow and rapid, the brain receives a signal that something is wrong. It interprets this pattern as urgency or danger and adjusts its activity accordingly. The body then follows the brain's lead, increasing tension, elevating heart rate, and preparing for survival even when no real threat is present. The brain is constantly reading the body for information. It does not rely only on thoughts or logic. It pays close attention to physical cues. Breath is one of the most influential of those cues. When breathing is fast and irregular, the brain assumes the environment is unsafe. When breathing is slow, steady, and deep, the brain receives a different message. It begins to shift out of survival mode and into regulation. This shift changes brainwave patterns, reduces stress hormone output, and allows higher-order brain functions to come back online. Many people try to calm their minds by thinking their way out of stress, but the brain under stress is not designed to be reasoned with. In heightened states, the thinking centers of the brain become less active, while survival circuits dominate. Trying to think positively in that state often feels impossible. Breath, however, bypasses that resistance. By consciously changing the rhythm of breathing, you speak directly to the nervous system in a language it understands. You don't argue with it, you inform it. As breathing slows, the body begins to release tension it didn't even know it was holding. Muscles soften, the jaw unclenches. The shoulders drop. These physical changes send feedback to the brain that the threat has passed. The brain responds by reducing the signals that keep the body on edge. This feedback loop works both ways, and with each cycle, coherence increases. The mind becomes clearer not because thoughts are forced to stop, but because the internal noise settles on its own. Over time, consistent regulation of breath reshapes how the brain responds to stress. Neural pathways associated with calm and presence become more accessible. The brain learns that it does not need to escalate every challenge into a crisis. This learning is stored not as an idea, but as a felt experience. The next time stress arises, the brain remembers that there is another option besides reactivity. That memory is embedded in the nervous system. Breath also influences the chemistry of the brain. Slow, intentional breathing increases the availability of neurotransmitters associated with stability and focus. It reduces the production of chemicals linked to anxiety and agitation. These chemical changes affect how neurons communicate with one another. Over time, the brain becomes less chaotic and more synchronized. This synchronization allows different regions of the brain to work together more efficiently, improving emotional regulation, perception, and decision making. When the brain is calm, the body follows. Organs begin to function more efficiently. Digestion improves. Immune responses become more balanced. Sleep cycles regulate. These changes are not separate events. They are the downstream effects of a nervous system that no longer believes it must stay in constant defense. Breath becomes the signal that tells the body it can redirect energy away from survival and toward maintenance and repair. Most people underestimate how often their breathing patterns are influenced by unconscious emotion. Holding the breath during tension, sighing in frustration, or breathing shallowly during worry all reinforce stress patterns. Becoming aware of these habits is the first step toward change. Awareness introduces choice. Instead of letting emotion dictate breath, breath begins to influence emotion. That reversal shifts the entire internal dynamic. As conscious breathing becomes familiar, it begins to happen more naturally. The body adopts a calmer baseline without effort. In challenging moments, the breath adjusts automatically instead of tightening. This is not a technique being applied, it is a new state being lived. The nervous system has learned through experience that regulation is possible. The brain trusts the body's signals and no longer overreacts to every stimulus. This process also affects how the brain interprets the self. When internal states are calmer, thoughts change tone. The inner dialogue becomes less critical and more spacious. Perception widens. Problems are seen with more clarity and less emotional charge. This is not because life becomes easier, but because the brain is no longer filtering experience through a lens of urgency. Breath creates space, and in that space, the mind reorganizes itself. With repetition, the connection between breath and brain becomes ingrained. A few slow breaths can shift an entire internal state. The body responds quickly because it has learned the pattern. The brain quiets because it recognizes the signal. Over time, this relationship becomes one of trust rather than control. The breath leads, the brain listens, and the body responds accordingly, creating a coherent internal environment where calm is not something you chase, but something that naturally emerges whenever awareness returns to the present moment through the simple act of breathing. Most people live their lives from a place of survival without realizing it. Survival is not just about extreme danger, it is a subtle, persistent internal state where the body and mind are constantly bracing for what might go wrong. In this mode, attention is pulled outward, scanning for threats, problems, and uncertainties. The nervous system stays activated, the mind stays busy, and the body stays tense. This state becomes so familiar that it feels like normal life. Many people mistake constant urgency, pressure, and mental noise for productivity or responsibility, when in reality it is the physiology of survival running the show. When the body is locked into survival, intention has very little power. Intention requires presence, clarity, and the ability to choose rather than react. But in survival mode, the brain prioritizes speed over awareness. It looks for quick answers, familiar patterns, and predictable outcomes. The future is approached through fear rather than possibility. Decisions are made to avoid pain rather than to create something new. Even when a person sets goals or imagines change, those intentions are filtered through the same old emotional state, which quietly recreates the same results. Survival mode is fueled by the belief that something outside of you controls your safety. Time, money, approval, circumstances, and outcomes become the focus of attention. The body responds by producing stress hormones that sharpen focus in the short term but exhaust the system over time. Creativity narrows. Perception becomes rigid. The brain loops through the same thoughts because it believes repetition equals control. In this state, the body is not designed to evolve, it is designed to endure. Intention begins where survival ends. The shift does not happen by forcing optimism or ignoring reality. It happens when the nervous system is shown that the present moment is safe enough to release its grip. This is an internal shift, not an external one. The moment the body begins to relax out of vigilance, awareness returns. Awareness creates space, and in that space, choice becomes available again. Intention is born from that space. Living in intention means directing energy instead of reacting to stimuli. It means deciding how you want to feel before the day decides for you. This does not mean controlling outcomes. It means aligning your internal state with the future you want to experience. The body responds powerfully to this alignment. When intention replaces survival, the nervous system reorganizes, stress chemistry decreases, and the brain begins to operate from coherence rather than chaos. The body follows the lead of the mind when the mind is present. The difference between survival and intention can be felt immediately. Survival feels tight, rushed, and heavy. Intention feels open, steady, and grounded. In survival, attention is fragmented. In intention, attention is focused. The same environment can exist, the same responsibilities can remain, but the internal experience changes completely. That change alters how the body responds to life. Muscles relax, breath deepens, the heart rate stabilizes. These are not side effects. They are signals that the body is no longer preparing for danger. When a person lives in intention consistently, the body begins to trust that state. Trust is essential because the body has learned survival through repetition. it will not let go immediately. But each time intention is chosen over reaction, the body receives evidence that it is safe to do so. Over time, that evidence accumulates. The nervous system updates its baseline. What once felt unfamiliar becomes natural. Calm no longer feels like a break from life, it feels like the foundation of it. Intention also changes how the brain perceives the future. Instead of projecting the past forward, the brain becomes receptive to possibility. New ideas arise, new behaviors feel accessible. The mind becomes less attached to old identities because it is no longer trying to protect them. In survival, identity is rigid because it feels like armor. In intention, identity is fluid because it feels like expression. The body supports this shift by reducing defensive responses and increasing adaptability. This is where true transformation begins. Not when circumstances change, but when the internal state from which you meet those circumstances changes. A person living in survival asks, "How do I get through this?" A person living in intention asks, "Who do I choose to be while I'm here?" That question reorganizes the entire system. The body responds by allocating energy toward growth rather than resistance. The brain supports this by forming new neural connections that reflect the chosen state. Living in intention does not mean stress disappears forever. It means stress no longer runs the system. Challenges still arise, but they are met with presence instead of panic. The body may activate briefly, but it returns to balance more easily. Recovery becomes faster. Resilience increases. The nervous system learns that activation does not have to become a permanent state. That learning is embodied, not intellectual. Over time, intention becomes the dominant signal. The body aligns with it automatically. Thoughts begin to match it. Emotions stabilize around it. The internal environment becomes coherent. From that coherence, actions emerge naturally. Effort feels cleaner. Focus feels easier. Life feels less like something that happens to you and more like something you participate in consciously. The most profound part of this shift is that the body does not resist it. The body has always been waiting for clear direction. Survival was a response to uncertainty. Intention provides clarity. When clarity is present, the body no longer needs to stay on guard. It follows the signal it is given. When that signal comes from awareness rather than fear, the body reorganizes itself around a different way of being, one where energy is no longer spent preparing for what might go wrong, but invested in what is being deliberately created from the inside out. Everything you've heard comes down to one simple truth that is rarely explained clearly. Your body is not separate from your mind, and it is not working against you. It is responding to the signals it receives every moment. Those signals are shaped by your thoughts, your emotions, your perceptions, and the internal states you rehearse daily. What feels automatic, fixed, or uncontrollable is often the result of patterns that have been practiced for years without awareness. When you understand that your body learns through repetition, you stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as conditioned. Conditioning can be changed. The same way stress, fear, and survival became familiar, calm, clarity, and intention can become familiar too. The body does not resist change because it is flawed. It resists because it is loyal to what it knows. Awareness is what introduces it to something new. This is not about forcing positivity, denying reality, or blaming yourself for what you feel. It is about recognizing that every internal state is a message, and every repeated message becomes a biological instruction. When you change the message consistently, the body listens. The nervous system adapts. The brain reorganizes. The chemistry shifts. What once felt impossible begins to feel accessible, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because your internal environment becomes coherent. Healing, growth, and transformation are not events reserved for rare moments. They are processes that unfold when the internal world stops contradicting the future you want to experience. When your breath calms the brain, when your perception stops signaling threat, when intention replaces survival, the body naturally moves toward balance. It has always been designed to do that. The most powerful realization is that you are not waiting for permission to change. You are not waiting for circumstances to align perfectly. You are not waiting for the body to catch up someday. Every moment of awareness, every regulated breath, every conscious choice sends a signal right now. Those signals add up, they become patterns. Patterns become states. States become a way of living. When you begin to live from presence instead of protection, from intention instead of reaction, the mind and body stop pulling in opposite directions. They work together. And in that cooperation, you don't just feel better temporarily, you begin to live differently from the inside out.